We turn today to the book of Nehemiah, another of what I think of as the relatively obscure books of the Bible. Unlike the book of Ezra, where Ezra himself only appears towards the end of the book, Nehemiah is front and center throughout this short book. Most of the book, in fact, is a first-person narrative by Nehemiah of his activities related to the rebuilding of the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Whereas Ezra was a priest, Nehemiah was a government official, working under the auspices of the Persian king, our old friend Artaxerxes. Nehemiah's narrative begins with an assessment of the conditions in Jerusalem and how things got that way. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. In the field of ethics, it is called an analysis of circumstances or a situational analysis. It is simply a description of whatever situation calls for action. It's a fancy name we give to something that is really quite ordinary. After all, whenever we decide to do something, we can almost always tell people why we're going to do whatever we plan to do. It can be as simple as, I'm cold, so I'm going to put on a sweater or turn up the thermostat. We've described a situation that calls for some form of action. In Nehemiah's case, of course, the situation was much more dire than that. It begins with Nehemiah then living in a city called Susa, where the Persian king lived. He asks about and receives a report from Jerusalem. Here's how the book begins. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakkalia, in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, while I was in Susa, the capital, one of my brothers, Hanani, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them about the Jews that survived, those who had escaped captivity, and about Jerusalem. They replied, the survivors there in the province who escaped captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. It's a pretty bleak picture here. There are Jews still living in Jerusalem, those who had not been sent away in the Babylonian exile, and by now there were also those who had returned in the first waves after being freed by the Persians when they defeated the Babylonians. But they live in a city that is a mere shadow of its former glory. The walls have been destroyed and the gates of the city burned to the ground. Most self-respecting cities of the day had walls around them, with a few gates by which people could come or go and which could be closed when the city was attacked. Jerusalem was a city in ruin, vulnerable to attack by anyone at any time. But there's another element to Nehemiah's description or analysis of circumstances, and he names the circumstances in a prayer to God. We know that the city is in ruins. Now in his prayer, he says why. He says, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Both I and my family have sinned. We have offended you deeply, failing to keep the commandments, the statutes, and the ordinances that you commanded your servant Moses. There it is. He could have given what we think of as the proximate cause of Jerusalem's fate, which would have been its sacking by the Babylonians and the exile of its leading citizens. And he would be correct. That is the proximate cause. But instead, he cuts to the underlying reasons why Jerusalem is in such a state. It's because of the sin of the people and their failure to live by the law given by Moses. And he says it in a deeply personal way. Not just the people in general, but I and my family. He understands that there is no finger pointing here, only an honest admission of guilt before God. This is the underlying cause behind the sacking of Jerusalem and the exile of its citizens to Babylon. Babylon was simply the instrument of God's judgment. Given this circumstance, we can now see what Nehemiah's course of action is to address the circumstance, and as we read portions of this short book, it will begin to make a lot of sense. Matching action to circumstance may seem like an easy thing to do, but it is important that the description of circumstances be accurate so that the cure can take hold. Tomorrow, Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem to assess the situation firsthand. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.